What's up, everyone? Thanks for stopping by. This is the Nocturnal Gamer here with a review of Paztec Games' latest project, Curse of the Dead Gods. A studio that started out as one man with a passion for gaming has grown into a dozen strong. But how does their latest project fare? Well, let's make a blood offering and get right to the scores. Up first is the story for Curse of the Dead Gods, which is not a very complex one, or hard to follow, or in-depth at all. Pretty much you're a treasure hunter in search of wealth and immeasurable power, which leads you to this cursed temple where the game takes place. Now, this cursed temple has tons of walkways and almost seemingly endless dungeons to loot and find weapons, gold, and relics of the past. Now, while you're adventuring through these tunnels and pathways, you'll fight various bosses that get harder and more ridiculous as you go on, and that is pretty much the setup for Curse of the Dead Gods. Yeah, that's it. Treasure hunt, find weapons, find gold, kill bosses, rinse and repeat. Now, at first, you may think, oh, that's going to get old pretty quickly, and to a degree you're right. But the other parts of the game really make up for the lack of story. For example, the game mechanics and gameplay. Probably the most important component to any game. Curse of the Dead God, from a glance, looks like a blend of Dark Souls, Diablo, with a splash of Temple Runner. That's right, Temple Runner, a real throwback there. And to a degree, you would be correct. The combat is simple. Left click for a primary attack, right click to use your secondary. Use your primary and secondary together to, pull off a fancy combo that deals more damage. Hold primary or secondary attack, well, you'll do a charge attack, all while timing your dodging and parries to stay alive. With most games, that's all you have to worry about, keeping your health intact and dealing massive amounts of damage. But not this game. That's where Curse of the Dead Gods is different. It introduces a corruption meter. Enemies dealing corruption damage, going through doors, and blood offerings all add to your corruption meter. Now, what's the big deal? A little bit of corruption. We're Americans. Well, the people who watch who are in America, we deal with corruption all the time. Well, wait a second, and I'll tell you, okay? With each time you fill a corruption meter, you gain a curse, and some curses can completely derail your playthrough. I'm telling you, some of these curses are just brutal. Like having every chest require a perfect parry in order to open it, or else you take damage and you have to try again. Or my favorite curse, every point of damage you take, you lose that much gold. So if someone deals 500 damage to you, well, guess what? You just lost 500 of your hard-earned gold coins, all right? Just brutal. Just simply brutal. In the words of Todd Howard, everything just works. Blessings, altars, divine favors, and, everything in this game just comes together as like a perfect recipe, okay? The gameplay mechanics get a 10 out of 10. Now, when the story is limited, like it is here in Curse of the Dead Gods, and you're not relying completely on your story to carry your game, other parts of your game come into focus. And one of the most important parts besides, the gameplay and mechanics would be the enemy variation. Because you're going through this dungeon, several times over and over again. Now, the dungeons may be different, but if you're just fighting the same enemies every time, it's going to get stale over time, no matter how good the mechanics are. And I'm happy to say that the enemy variation in Curse of the Dead Gods is pretty good, I would say. I'm happy to report they did a good job on varying the enemies. They all have unique attack patterns, unique attacks, and some even have abilities that add to the variation. And when enemies of different types work together to bring you down, the game can get downright, just savage and, cause even the best Demon Souls or Bloodborne player to pull out their hair. The game boasts different beasts and enemies to conquer from arena to arena. So, from harpies to eagle spirits to the serpent cultist. Each spire will have different enemies that you have to plan your attacks around and, stay on your toes. Because, when they work together, like I said, they really blend well and add to the difficulty and replayability of the game. And that brings me to the bosses. My God, the bosses are some of the best bosses I've played against recently. They are really tough. And your first level of bosses, you think, oh, well, this is okay. But then those bosses become champions, which are just normal, like, middle of your run foes that you have to defeat. And that just makes the later levels really tough to beat. The Abomination and the Witch are some of the most difficult bosses that I had problems with in this game. I mean, just look at the insanity here on the screen. I mean, how do you even dodge this? It's bullshit. Enemies and bosses for me get a 9 out of 10. Now on to the graphics and music of Curse of the Dead Gods. And as you can tell by the gameplay footage in the background, the graphics aren't groundbreaking by any means, but they're sort of serviceable and, suit the game well. And to be honest, I typically, don't love cartoon visuals or cel-shaded works, but to be honest, most of the time I'm just trying not to get smacked into the Shadow Realm by the Abomination or the Witch or any other enemy that decides to fuck up my playthrough. The music kind of takes a back seat in Curse of the Dead Gods. To be honest, it's kind of like you're sitting at this fine, restaurant. The game mechanics are the big steak sitting in front of you. You're not there to headbang. You're here to enjoy the meat. So you're here to. That's what she said. But you're here to enjoy, the meat of the game, which is the gameplay, the loot system, the replayability of the game. So for me, graphics and music, aren't the focal point here of the game. And I give them a 7 out of 10. Yeah, the graphics and music get a 7 out of 10 for me. Last but not least, as I just touched on in the last section, music and graphics, is replayability. Alright, despite the surface level story that's as deep as Kathleen Kennedy thinks she is, Curse of the Dead Gods had me hooked and playing it over and over again, in part because of how every playthrough of a dungeon is different. You're going to go down different paths, you're not going to go down the same path every time, so it adds a lot of variety to the game. I mentioned weapons and altars earlier. They spawn weapons for you to enter the tomb with, and every time you go into a tomb, it spawns different weapons. So you're not going in with the same primary and secondary every playthrough. It gets mixed up and takes you out of your comfort zone. If you're really good with a machete and a shield, you're not going to get that every time. You're going to be forced to use like throwing hammers and throwing knives and whips and stuff like that. So that adds to the replayability. Combine that with starting from scratch every time. This is where the comparison of like Temple Runner or something like that would come in. You don't get to carry your gold over from playthrough to playthrough. You don't carry your attributes over playthrough to playthrough. The only thing you get is your starting weapon and shield. You don't even get to keep the stuff you buy throughout your playthrough and carry it to the next playthrough. Everything's a fresh start. And I think that adds to the replayability of the game in a huge way. Now, you also have blessings, which are kind of like modifiers, and you can buy them with skulls earned by defeating enemies and bosses, and they can affect your playthroughs as well. You can start your playthrough with 1,000 gold and like 6 perception or something like that. It can really change how you fare in a playthrough. If you get smacked by the end boss, maybe you restart, add some blessings, maybe buy some blessings, and that can completely change your outcome. Now, replayability for me in Curse of the Dead Gods earns a 10 out of 10. Let me tell you, I'm still playing this game and I enjoy it thoroughly. Okay, so overall, Curse of the Dead Gods was a pleasant surprise to me. I really enjoyed it. It was the best, probably $19 I've spent in a while, and that's another point. The price point of the game I think is fair. It's $19. It has a lot of replayability. The gameplay mechanics are solid, and that's why Curse of the Dead Gods earns an 8.5 out of 10 for me. I highly recommend it, guys. Go check it out. It's $19. You can't go wrong, okay? And that ends this Nocturnal game review. Hope you enjoyed it. Leave a like, subscribe, all that good YouTube shit, and I'll see you on the next Nocturnal game review.